Hello, everyone. Welcome to this very important session of Commodity Week. So today we'll be talking about maize, and as you know, that we'll be having six more sessions, including the current today's, on different aspect of agriculture commodity sector. Maize is a very important, or I would say one of the most traded agriculture commodities in the world, and that is what we'll be talking about today. Further, going forward, we will be having tomorrow's session on wheat, followed by a session on rice, then on soybean, chickpeas, sugar. So the lineup is set for next 6 days. Today I'm having a very brilliant set of panelists who will be talking on different aspects of maize as a commodity. We are having some of the best minds when it comes to market, all the way from Egypt to Europe to India, and all of them would be trying to ensure right insight can be provided about the maize as a commodity. I take this opportunity to make a supply and demand presentation, and then we will get into one-on-one chat with each of the panelists. Unlike a panel discussion, which you would have seen in similar events, what we are doing is that to ensure that the chain of thoughts of our speaker are continuous, we would be having an individual speaker take overall perspective from him, and then have questions which are relevant to the current context. So let's start with a brief presentation. So I'm pretty sure my screen is visible to everyone. Neeraj, can you just confirm?
Yes, it's clear, audible.
Perfect. Awesome. So let's talk about, as I said, we'll be having this commodity week spread across the 6 days, starting from maize, ending with sugar. And today's topic is maize. Now, let me run through some of the numbers, which I believe are very important. These numbers are typically global supply and demand numbers. And if you see that we are expecting pretty decent crop, better than the last year for maize in 2026, 25, 26. We'll be having close to 1,218 million metric ton of maize, which will be produced in 2025-26. Predominantly, we are seeing positive numbers coming from Americas, that is both the North America as well as South America. Production is pretty high, better than what it used to be in 2024-25 and 23-24. While you see that actually, in 2022 and 23 to 2023 and 24, we had pretty decent increase in maize production, but it tapered up a little bit in 2024 and 25. 2025-26 again gives good number. As I said, from North America and South America, as well as we're also seeing positive trends when it comes to back home in India. In fact, the Kharif season has been pretty good, and I'll be talking about Indian numbers also as we move forward. If you see global trade, it is more or less past 3 years has been pretty flat, and there are various geopolitical reasons for such, I would say, trends. Demand has predominantly remained, I would say, stagnated when it comes to some of the key destinations when it comes to maize. Secondly, we also have a issue of maize is divided into non-GMO and GMO maize, and that also is very vital factor when it comes to overall understanding of supply and demand of maize. Supply has been pretty decent, as you can see that actually we had a pretty decent ending stock. But as I said, that the consumption might improve a little bit in this year, and we'll be having a again pretty flat ending stock. In fact, a little bit lower than what it used to be in the last year. So one of the reasons for the reduction in the stock is that actually many countries, including India, they are looking towards maize as just not food or feed, but also as a fuel. And that debate is going on. And India this year has diverted a substantial amount of maize in production of ethanol. And similarly, we would also see trends happening in US, where the ethanol consumption production from maize would also gain some currency. And That is where actually our global supply and demand looks like. Now, these numbers are actually predominantly curated by KYC itself, and you would find some of those numbers would be shared subsequently by some of our participants, whether they would be taking the government of India's number or whether they would be taking number of USDA. But this is what actually our own private assessment numbers are. Now, let's see how different countries are shaping up. So we see again not too much increase in China. It is pretty predominantly flat with roughly 295 million metric tons productions to be seen in 2025-26. US, we see a substantial increase, and 2025-26, we see 427 million metric tons as a production as compared to 383 million metric ton in 2024-25. Brazil has also shown improvement, as I was telling you, like, predominantly both in North and South America. Trends looks very positive when it comes to production, acreage, as well as yield. So Brazil is at 122, Argentina at 53 million metric tons. European Union, again, pretty flat. We are seeing that there might be very marginal increase in production from 64 million metric tons to 66 million metric tons. India, as I said, like, we are looking at pretty decent crop of 43 million metric ton. And already we have seen in Kharif, the number to be something close to 28.9 million metric ton. So in India, actually, two seasons are there, Rabi and Kharif. And maize or corn is grown in both the seasons. Ukraine, again, don't see too much of increase, but tentatively we are looking at 30 million metric ton coming from Ukraine as well. And then South Africa, 16.4 million metric ton. So these are some of the key maize production countries in the world, and these are the numbers which we anticipate would be. Now, when it comes to export, again, lion's share is definitely United States with 75 million metric ton of export possibility or surplus available for export. Brazil around 42 million metric ton, Argentina 37, Ukraine 25.5, Russia, though there is a little bit of dip, 3 million metric ton. Paraguay, European Union, and Canada, all they are as good as last year or tad lower. In fact, European Union, we are finding, and even in Canada, we are finding that the export surpluses or availability of surpluses for export might fall. Going to back home, as I said, India. So India, like, we have seen that in 2020-23, we had a decent crop, and then there was a dip in 2023-24. But overall in 2024-25, as well as in 2025-26, we are seeing increase in maize production. And that glut has also led to some of the challenges, including crashing prices. So what the farmers were anticipating this year, unfortunately, the prices are pretty lower than that. At the same time, we are also seeing that the global prices are also not formed up much. Even the push for ethanol, where actually government allowed a substantial amount of market share, or I would say production share for the oil marketing company coming from maize and broken rice rather than from sugarcane or molasses. That is, I would say, hold price a little bit, but still, like, the overproduction and the glut is very visible. India imported last year, but this year we see hardly much of import. Again, last year we touched nearly 1 million metric ton of import because of, again, the diversion and the requirement from starch and feed industry. But this year, things looks pretty, I would say, okay. We are having sufficient production in-house, and even 0.5 million metric ton figure looks a little bit of optimistic. Predominantly, like, this will be coming from Myanmar and the closer borders where the non-GMO maize is grown. Supply is comfortable at 44.64 million metric ton. Export, yeah, we might do a little bit of export, but as I said, that, like, it's not big numbers. India is not a big exporting country and doesn't influence too much when it comes to export market. Ending stock, again, would be better than last year. We would be adding up at least 1.5 million metric tons in our ending stock. Even though we have seen that the demand through ethanol has increased, still we will be having a surplus, which is more than the ending stock of the last year. And with that, I would stop my presentation and would invite our panelists. So thanks a lot for patience hearing to this presentation. So can we have Aromal? Hi, Aromal, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Perfect. So Aromal, I would request you to start your video and we can have some discussion.
I think you will have to enable the video from your side. Yeah.
No, you're live. You're live now.
Okay.
So thanks a lot, Aromal. Like, interesting times for maize. So let me first introduce Aromal. So Aromal Jkoshi is a seasoned agriculture expert with extensive experience in navigating the complexity of agro ecosystem and production resilience. His work emphasizes diversifying agriculture system to withstand biotic and abiotic stress, particularly in context of climate variability. With a strong background in indigenization of crops and sustainable food production, he advocates for increasing crop heterogeneity to traditional agriculture practices and modern market demands. He is also astute student and expert both combined on how the Indian maize market moves. He keeps on voicing his concern on various aspects, especially when it comes to managing the supply side fluctuation and its impact on market stability. Over to you, Aramal.
Thank you, Deepak ji. And so let me first share my screen. I have a few slides, so I will use that.
Yes, sure.
Are you able to see my screen?
Not so far, Aramal.
Just a minute. Oops.
And if you want, I can share it for you.
Yeah, if you can do that. Thank you.
Yeah, I hope it is visible to you, Aramal, now.
Yes, it is.
So yeah, please.
Can we go to the next? So, as Deepak ji has rightly pointed out, I mean, we are in a situation where there is a lot of surplus of maize in the global markets. So, before I get into the details, I mean, let me first try to explain the surplus with some numbers of USDA. Can we go to the next screen, please?
I'm sorry, I think this presentation is stuck. Just a second. Okay, let me try that again. Yeah, I think it's fine now.
Right. So Deepak ji also mentioned at the beginning of this presentation that we are in an environment where there is a pretty large surplus of corn. As you can see in 25-26, the overall corn production as per the USDA December estimates is estimated to be closer to 1 to 83 million metric tons. And that is practically almost 52 million metric tons over and above the corn production which was there in 24-25. And compared to 22-23, you can see that, while compared to last year, it's a 50 million tons of difference. Compared to 22-23 is almost close to 120 million metric tons of excess corn available. You can see this number of 1165 versus 1282. And where is almost this corn coming from? It is basically coming from US, where out of this 52.3 million metric ton, which is excess available this year, almost 47.5 million metric ton is basically coming from US alone. And again, if you can see, rewind a little bit of into the previous years, this is almost like a 75 million tons extra compared to what was available in 22-23. However, coming to Brazil and Argentina, we can see that especially for Brazil, we are seeing a slight reduction in production. I mean, that is what the USDA is estimating. That is 131 versus 136. And for Argentina, a slight increase in production. That is a 53 versus 50. So net between Brazil and Argentina together, we are seeing a crop which is lower by closer to 2 million metric ton in 25-26 compared to 24-25. Again, we can see this big change which is basically happening in Ukraine. 4-5 years back, before the war started, Ukraine used to produce something like a 42 million metric ton. That had come down to closer to 27 million metric ton last year. And this year, we are seeing a slight increase of close to 3 million metric tons, basically taking the Ukrainian crop up to 29 million metric ton. And coming to the domestic side, I mean, over the last 4-5 years, what we are seeing is that the Indian farmers have done a wonderful bit, taking the crop up from closer to 33 million metric ton upwards of 43 million metric ton. That is a delta of close to 10 million metric ton, which has happened over the last 4-5 years. That means, a large part of this is basically driven by this ethanol, the corn demand that has basically happened from the ethanol side. Even though I have some difference in opinion between the delta that the USDA is talking about, compared to last year and this year, USDA is not showing much increase. That is closer to a 0.7 million metric ton only. But I am more aligned with what Deepak ji showed at the beginning of this presentation, where the delta in the crop is upwards of 4 to 5 million metric ton in 25-26 compared to 24-25. So while we can debate on what is the absolute number, I think the crop delta for India is actually much higher than what the USDA is estimating at this point of time. Next slide, please, Deepak ji. And again, if you look at the world ending stocks, what we can see is that in spite of an increase in the crop overall, we can see the overall ending stock for the world is coming down from closer to 293 million tons to 279 million metric ton. And we can see a drop, which is basically happening in China. And if we do net of China, it is almost like 105 million metric ton, 100 to 105 million metric ton range, which is basically there over the last 4-5 years. And again, coming to US, there is a big increase in the carry-out stock, which is also reflected in the seaboard prices. From closer to 39 million metric ton, we are seeing this carry-out stocks of US going up to 51.5 million metric ton. While for Brazil and Argentina, we can see that the overall carry-out stocks are basically expected to come down. 3.5 million metric ton versus 10.4, and Argentina 5.8 versus 6.28. And again, I disagree with the Indian numbers. What the USDA is telling that the S&D is tighter this year compared to last year. I have a difference of opinion there. Again, directionally, we should see a carry-out ending stocks in India, which is more than what we had last year. Again, one important point to note is the carry-out stocks in Ukraine is again flattish at less than 1 million metric ton. And Ukraine, as we all know, is one of the important sources of non-GMO corn, especially if India want to import. Though I don't expect India to import this year too much of corn. But without even factoring in India, the carry-out stocks of Ukraine is less than 1 million metric ton. So just in case something goes wrong in India going forward, then this could be an issue, because this is basically the largest supplier of non-GMO corn that India can import. Next slide, please. So as we see, the increase in production in the global markets has basically reflected on the global corn prices from somewhere closer to 800 plus when the last La Nina was there. It has now come down to lower 400s, 440 types as we speak. So the global S&D is naturally getting reflected on the seaboard prices. And we also know that US has a problem with higher production and larger carry-out stocks this year. Again, from the India point of view, when we have a pretty cheap corn globally, what is basically going to happen is that, one of our major industries are normally going to get affected. That is the starch industry, because if you have lower corn prices globally, our competitiveness in the starch exports will basically come down. And that has been happening for the last 1.5 years, where we see a significant slowdown in the starch exports out of India over the last 1.5 years. And again, if the global prices are cheap, while corn exports can happen on an opportunistic basis, any large structural exports that can happen out of India, I think the probability of that is limited. So when 3-4 years back, when the corn was 650 to 800 types, that is when the major corn exports happened out of India, and now at seaboard at closer to 440 types. The CNF values to Southeast Asia remains relatively subdued, which makes the Indian corn exports, I would call it rather opportunistic. Yes, there are some export which is happening, but that will be more opportunistic than structural going forward. Next slide, please. I will not spend much time here, but as we see, every country in the world is major corn producing country in the world is pumping up exports. US compared to last year is supplying close to 9 million metric ton. Brazil and Argentina together close to another 9 million metric ton, and Ukraine close to another 3 million metric ton. India, again, I disagree. The USDA numbers are closer to 0.35, but my opinion is that we should end up exporting somewhere between 0.75 to 1 million tons by the time we end this crop season. Next slide, please. So before I summarize, how do I see the corn outlook for the current 25-26 crop season? I mean, what I believe is that the Kharif crop is estimated to be 10 to 15% larger than the 2024 crop. So that is closer to 3.5 million delta from the Kharif itself. We don't have any major negative news from the Rabi sowing so far. And that means that there is going to be ample domestic supplies in 25-26 with a better crop in Kharif and a not bad crop in Rabi, and probably a better crop in Rabi itself. I think there is going to be ample supplies in 25-26. Exports, it is happening, but I would call it more opportunistic because the global environment is not very supportive because of the cheaper corn prices which are there globally. So only if the Indian prices crashes too much, that is when the structural exports can happen. But that possibility of exports will basically provide a flow to the market. That is my opinion. And on the import side, in spite of the global surplus which is there, too much of crop in South America, too much of crop in US. But the good thing about India is that the GMO imports continue to be banned. So US and South American corn cannot come into the country, and at least in the near future. And one of these major talking points nowadays has been that the US-India trade deal is under negotiations, and India is under too much of pressure to open up GMO corn imports for ethanol and other uses. But with domestic corn prices trading well below the MSP, at least that possibility of corn imports, GMO corn imports happening, even if it is restricted for ethanol in 25-26, I think that probability is very limited for this current crop season. Imports from Ukraine and Myanmar, I believe it is going to be limited because we have plenty of local crop available. And with Myanmar quoting at closer to 280 types and little bit upwards of that, the parities will open up only if the corn price, domestic corn prices are upwards of 26-27 rupees, which we are very far away from the current ground realities in the market. And similarly from Ukraine, I mean, the most probable way for the Ukrainian corn to come in is against advanced license, where corn is imported at zero duty against re-export of starch. But as we discussed at the beginning of this presentation, the starch exports are not very competitive. And also the Ukrainian corn cannot land in India cheaper than 24 rupees types, which is again much higher than what the domestic market is there at this point of time. Net, in a nutshell, what I believe is that the India corn S&D for 25-26 is expected to be looser than that of 24-25. But the million-dollar question is that already reflected in the prices, or is the prices going to go down too much further? And my opinion is that I mean, a large part of this is already reflected in the current prices. And there are a lot of, the probability of a large downside from the current levels, I don't think is very much possible looking at the current situation. Next slide, please. And why do I think a significant downside is not possible is because ethanol, it has become a major pillar. And from the cycle one, we have seen that 12.6 million metric ton of corn diversion is expected. Even though there are more cycles that could happen in the coming weeks, coming months, and we need to keep a close watch about the feedstock allocations that can happen from the upcoming cycles. If at all there is a very poor allocation to corn, in the upcoming cycles, yes, that could impact the sentiments. But again, that is something that we have to keep in mind. But again, from the OMC point of view, I understand from their economics, FCI rice gives the cheapest ethanol, so they will always lobby for the FCI rice-based ethanol compared to corn-based ethanol because one is something like 62 rupees and versus 72 rupees from the corn-based ethanol. Meanwhile, what we understand is that poultry and starch industry compared to last year is doing better. We have seen government intervention happening through MSP. Telangana government already buying upwards of probably 300,000 tons already. And today morning also, we saw some news floating around about the Karnataka government talking about market intervention, and that if the prices remain subdued at the current levels, that there will be more pressure on the governments, I think, on MSP buying, at least some sort of an intervention, even though not large scale, but there will continue to be intervention. And as far as the Bangladesh flows are concerned, again, we have to be watchful about the tensions which are there and the impact on Bihar, West Bengal flows in the upcoming season. But having said all this, I mean, we should understand that the farmers did sow corn last year because at the last Kharif harvest, the corn was trading at closer to 24 rupees approximately. And before that, the corn had moved up to closer to 30 rupees. And today, in many places, corn is trading between 1600 to 1800 rupees. So at the end of the day, the crop economics will start playing out. And my bias is that the current corn prices will have an impact on next year's sowing. The farmers may not be as enthusiastic about corn sowing. Of course, there are people who says that, okay, farmers doesn't have an option, but I don't tend to agree to that because a lot of the acreages that came to corn came from pulses. Some of that came from cotton. Some of that came from cane and different crops. I know, and there's a possibility that at the current prices, there is some of this corn might some of these acreages could shift back into other crops. Next slide, please. Again, we need to keep a close watch about what is happening. I mean, at this point of time, there has been this talk about this small La Nina, which is happening between December, January and all, which created some dryness in South America and all. But what we can see is that over the next 4-5 months, the chart is completely flipping. And the chart is slowly inching up to, it has not reached the El Nino territory. But if it reaches the El Nino territory by the time the next monsoon happens, I mean, corn, especially the Kharif corn, is very much dependent on rainfall. On one side, the farmers are not very enthused to, probably not enthused to sow more corn because of the prices. And if the weather also flips to the El Nino territory, especially for India, that is going to be bad news. But at this point of time, we don't see that. I mean, it is still in the neutral sort of thing, but we know that there is 5-6 months still there. And if that flipping happens, I mean, that is something that we have to, I mean, that is a warning for all the bears which are there in the market at this point of time. Next slide, please. And some of these early indications, I mean, SkyMet has already put up a flag saying that there could be a subpar 2026 monsoon, even though we are sitting in January and trying to talk about June, July. I mean, I know it is too early, but some of these experts in the field have already put a flag, and this has to be kept in the back of our minds, especially those people who think that the corn prices can significantly come down from the current levels. I mean, these things comes without too much of warnings and can at many times take people, they can catch people off guard. So that is from my side. Thanks a lot, and we'll be happy to take any questions.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Aromal. Pleasure having such a insightful discussion. And this is where actually, because unfortunately we have run most of the time the presentation, I have one very important question I don't want to miss. You talked about, I see, El Nino prediction, and we have seen that how far our long-term projections and predictions have been in monsoon, right? So I would take it with a lot of pinch of salt, whether it is the company you have mentioned or whether it is IMD or anyone else. we have been very pathetic when it comes to long term, I would say, analysis. Yes, we are good in when it comes to finding what's going to happen in next 7 days. We are very bad when it comes to 3 months, 4 months, or 5 months, and the division has been humongous. So I'm not even going that early. But at the same time, you rightly mentioned that the super glut, whether it is in India, whether it is in the rest of the world, is creating a lot of pressures on the prices of the corn. As a trader, how do you see it? Right? Is it a bottom where actually that they should aggregate, keep it, and move forward? Or in case you are a ethanol producing company, do you want that actually to store now and use it later, or do you go with the flow and still do a wait and watch?
See, at this point of time, looking at the crop scenario, the crop is definitely better than what it was last year. And the carryout that we expect is also going to be better than what it was last year. So from the end consumer's point of view, personally, I don't see a major problem from the availability of raw material. And I don't see a need for the end consumers, especially to panic, especially trying to think that there will not be corn available for the rest of the year until the new crop comes in. So that is one point of view. But having said that, at the current price levels, which is there in the market, which is probably, depending on the location, 1700, 1800, 1900, that kinds of numbers that we are talking about, the kind of downside that I see to the current price levels, it is very limited. And if the price levels actually drop, then the exports will kick in, and the material will start moving out to Southeast Asian countries, and that will be a floor to the market. That is what I believe. And all this talks about, while we don't expect, but there could be a unpredictability with the long-term predictions as far as the monsoons and all concerned. I mean, that is when people get caught off guard, and so that thing basically has to be kept in the back of the mind. So what I personally believe is that these, especially in the upcoming Rabi season, when the harvest is in full swing, there will be opportunities for the stockists to enter, to take some positions, and probably start playing for some of these weather events to play out once the off season starts. So that is my personal opinion.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Vimal. It was pleasure having you. And now we go to our next participant, and now we'll be talking a little bit about policies, because you know that policies are pretty important, and especially in 2026, I've written very recently an article where actually I talked about how the policy are going to be one of the most important pillar. It's not whether it is a government notification coming from maybe a Krishi Bhavan, rather than actually what's going to be happening across on the supply demand or on the weather. And we are having a very strong voice. In fact, Shweta ji has been a leading agriculture economist and founder of Arcus Policy Research, and she is known for her deep analytical work in India's food security and agriculture trade policies. Former consultant with Agri, and she has co-authored seminal reports on India's ethanol blending targets and grain procurement system. He provides data-driven evidence on feasibility of E20 ethanol mandate, and it was pretty controversial and discussed pretty like in a lot of boardrooms and the policymakers' room. And often she highlights the friction between the food security and the fuel requirement. Her rigorous econometric models makes her an authority on how policy shift impact the grain balance sheet. Welcome, Shweta ji. Your initial comments on whatever we have talked so far, ma'am.
Thank you for the kind invitation and the introduction, Deepak ji. I think I've been listening to your presentation and to Aromal ji. It is heartening to know that the farmers have always responded to price signals, and it is disheartening to know that somewhere the policies always lag behind supporting them. And it is a very right time where we should be discussing how policies and farmer response has to go together, because maize is the future. We know it is important for economics of farmers. We know it is important for our feed industry, and now also for fuel. Of course, I've got views on maize for fuel or not. We can talk about it as we progress. But thank you very much for inviting me here, and I'm happy to share my thoughts.
So, ma'am, first thing is that one of your research has been talking about or questioning the whole feasibility itself, and in fact, it is playing out, right? Because of ethanol policy, we made so optimistic about going for sowing so much of maize. I think it was more than 8% increase in acreage, and then actually we are having a situation where now, when the prices are literally crashed, right, and ethanol industry is very happy because of this crash. At the same time, just few months back, they were shouting on the government to increase the price of maize-based ethanol. Now, end of the day, ethanol industry doesn't suffer, right? It is a farmer who are suffering. How do you see this whole E20 and now, like, the new mantra, right, of flexi fuel, maybe like, why not to go to 100% ethanol? Are we actually like playing with fire with our farmers because their livelihood? We have already seen Karnataka has to pull in, and then this is the first time I'm seeing a state government has to put a floor price of support below MSP, right? So we have already getting a validation from the government itself, right? Maybe it's a state government that actually, sorry, we cannot give you the MSP, right? We can only support you till the level where actually like, 2 rupees or 3 rupees below MSP, we might still be able to support you. And while we talk about government buying maize, I don't think that has been happening, and they don't even have capability and capacity, right, to themselves buy and like maybe sell at the time when the prices are high. How do you see this, like the policy quantum which we are having in India?
Deepak ji, just a few years back, we did a report estimating if E20 can be fulfilled from domestic crops, mainly three crops, that is rice, maize, and sugar-based derivative products. And what we had found was ceteris paribus, or business as usual, the country may not be able to fulfill their E20 requirements. Now, proof of the pudding was we saw it in the last few years when El Nino happened, how sugar export policies had to be changed, how rice export policies had to be changed. So we see that the government policy has been reacting to a policy that was called National Biofuel Policy. Now, why I say this is, when they created the policy that we needed about 10.16 billion liters, what they had found was that sugarcane would be able to play a certain role and the remainder role will be played by rice and maize. But what has happened was, 2 years back when the rains failed, the contribution from sugar relatively got capped, and therefore grains had to come in. So suddenly there was pressure on maize. We saw it last year. The prices went up. Farmers took the price signal. They sow the crop. But what happened in all of this was that the government in between decided to release about 5.2 million tons of FCI rice. Of course, the actual release is much lower. But then what this also did was there was a sentiment that was building up, and suddenly there was rice from the FCI, which was much cheaper. And also, as my previous speaker had mentioned, maize-based ethanol is expensive and rice-based ethanol is much cheaper. So the OMCs also preferred to take that ethanol. So what then happened was there was a policy action that again disrupted a market. And today we have a response from the farmers. We usually track acreages in maize. And from the data from 29th December, we see that the acreage in maize in Rabi is up about 4 to 5%. So clearly the policies have been reacting with an overarching aim of wanting to meet E20. But the way we see it is that E20 to be met by domestic crops, that is 1G, is capped, and unless FCI rice plays a role, we see maize taking the residual burden. And our own assessment, where we are doing projections, annual projections of biofuel supply likelihoods till 2930, we find that the current ethanol demand, which as per the earlier policy was about 10.16 billion liters annually, is already at 12 billion liters and is likely to go up to 17 billion liters. Of this, we anticipate at least 45% to come from maize alone. So that implies we anticipate about 17 to 18 MMTS of maize going by 2930 for ethanol. Clearly, the market is strong. We already know that the feed industry is growing at 7 to 8%. I see Ricky Thaper ji is there. He would talk more about it. So we see there is a robust demand. We see that we need maize. We will be deficit in maize. But it is episodes like this that shake our confidence in market dynamics. But that's also because the policies have played their role. And so I see that fundamentally the economy needs maize. We need our maize. It is an episode that has happened because of many other dynamic developments. And of course, in the end, it is the farmer who suffered, nobody else. And we wish that there is a mechanism. And of course, as I hear from the last speaker, about 1 million metric tons of exports are likely to go up, and that's going to clean up some system. But to think that the maize demand will fall, there is no fundamental analysis that shows that. It is only likely to go up faster.
No,
Deepak ji.
I totally agree with you. Like, even I'm part of the National Institute of Agriculture, Economics and Policy Research. And they also came out with a very beautiful paper which talked about, like, our demand maize in 2047 would be at least close to 3 times of what we are talking about today. And this is a alarming factor, but at the same time, right, policy is not taking a long-term, I would say, steps in those direction. Now, if we see that, like, pushing rice, which we are having too much this year, we are making maize as a sacrificial lamb, right? First we promoted maize, then actually, like, first we promoted sugarcane, then actually, like, we sacrificed it to maize, and then we are sacrificing maize to rice. Where do you see, like, what according to you should be a long-term policy when it comes to ethanol, so that actually, like, we don't get into these turn on and turn off scenarios?
So, I have more drastic researcher views on it. My personal evaluation is that to anticipate that the biofuel of future of India will be ethanol is something we need to rethink, because ethanol, ideally, unless created from residues and waste byproducts, that is from 2G, is what is more sustainable. From 1G or from crops directly, of course, has its food, feed, fuel trade-offs, which is there. I see going forward CBG, compressed biogas, biopellets, biomethanol, even SAF picking up much faster than ethanol. But having said this, ethanol is not going anywhere from our policy narrative, and rightly so. Every investments are being made, the crops are being, the crop areas are being developed to feed these requirements. So what I've been constantly writing about is that the country needs a strategic policy of where it needs to dedicate its land. I'll give you an example, Deepakji. We did an analysis in the last 3 years, how much land in which state has been diverted to which crop. And in these states where acreages under maize has gone up, the acreages of crops like groundnut, cotton, pulses like tur, gram in rabi, and sunflower have actually suffered. So clearly we need our maize. We need our maize for our feed industry. We need our maize for the fuel industry. But are we looking at this higher production coming from higher area being diverted, or higher yields being delivered from the same piece of land, or both? Is a very strategic decision that the country needs to take. I've heard people in policy circles talk about, let's just look at residual land or land that was marginalized and plug that up for creating crops for fuels, but that's not going to happen. Our own study from Telangana, for example, showed that as soon as a land becomes arable or there is access to irrigation, farmers tend to go back to growing crops like rice. So that's one. So clearly we need a land policy. Second, we need to understand that there are two arms of politics. One is whenever there are elections, we see bonuses on paddy go up so drastically that we see increased acreages coming back to paddy. And on the other hand, there are states like Punjab where they want us, where they're suggesting that maize acreages should go up. So clearly politics and economics and environment have to talk to each other, and they cannot be alien, wherein politics, it keeps giving bonuses on paddy, because of which you're producing more, because of which FCI is procuring more, and because FCI has a surplus stocks that it has to release for energy. This all cycle will need a strategic thinking of, do we need as much production of rice? So Deepakji, we have estimated that from 150 million metric tons, business as usual rice production will go up to 170 million metric tons in the next 4 to 5 years. Do we need as much rice? How much? Where will this rice go? 38 to 40% of it does get procured by FCI. FCI only needs as much of under its public distribution system. If the poverty is going down, do you want to continue to supply to 813 million people? We need to rethink. Is it rice that we need to distribute to these guys, or is it pulses? These are the strategic questions. Unless raised at the policy level, you cannot have a holistic view of, can we do enough maize, or should we do enough maize for ethanol? So these are the decisions we see at the moment, at least as researchers, when we see it, is there is a lack of larger vision. There is a bioethanol vision, there is a CBG vision, there is an acreages vision, and much of these don't talk to each other. And then there is a food security PDS vision. Ideally, it is the same set of people we're talking about. It is that same gross cropped area of 200 million hectares that we are talking about. And there are trade-offs. And This is the policy debate that we've been constantly writing about, that these arms of policies have to talk to each other. They cannot be siloed. Deepak ji.
So, Shweta, thanks a lot for such a, I would say, clear explanation of the policy. Let me be on the outside of being outspoken, which I'm known to be. I don't see it as a gap in the silos. It is a pure chronic capitalism. Any smart person would understand that when the maize acreage is increasing on compromising on pulses, you are directly impacting the protein security of this nation. In a country where 1/3 of the kids are stunted, right? Why would you like anybody to grow not groundnut and pulses and then move to maize? That too for ethanol. Secondly, ethanol as a clean fuel. If the land use is coming from pulses and groundnut, you increase the usage of fertilizer, you increase the use of, and eventually all the positives of environmental, I say that advantages, they just evaporate. Now, again, that's a broader topic about how the economic policies of any nation should be made. It's coming back to farmers. Now, do you see that actually while we have promoted maize and given 24 rupees as MSP to farmers for maize, and with the type of production which we are having, right? This year there is a huge suffering for the farmers because I don't see that nobody would be keen to pay 24 rupees. All these ethanol companies which are talking about that we are pro farmers, and suddenly you find that before election a lot of doles were given to ethanol plants in Bihar, and they'll be growing in Rabi again a substantial amount of maize. Do you think that actually the farmers are going to be suffering far more than actually they did?
So, there are at least three things around this. One, there is no doubt that the farmers are likely to suffer. No doubt they already are. But then would that suffering continue by the time the next Rabi crops is harvested? We are yet to see, because is that increase enough to cover up the increased demand of maize in the economy? We'll just have to wait and see. We see, yes, there are surpluses in the balance sheet at the moment, but how much surplus is there? We'll have to just wait and watch and see. Second thing, I foresee that maize demand is not going down at any point in time in the near future. And farmers to suffer, we need to understand one thing that, and this is something that I've been as commodity, I mean, we study commodities as researchers, and we see that there is a predictable cycle to crops. This cycle is basically prices go up, acreages increase, then because acreages increase, there is a glut in the system, the prices fall, and then the acreages fall, and then the cycle continues. In pulses, the cycle is little longer. In onion and tomato, the cycle is little smaller, but it is predictable. But what I foresee is that the demand and the fundamentals look strong for maize. But having said this, the second aspect to this is the ethanol side of the supply. And we know that when the OMCs buy ethanol, they are not able to differentiate if the ethanol is created from maize or from rice. So that basically means that if ethanol from maize is bought at 72 and everything and ethanol from every other grain is bought at a cheaper price, there is an incentive in the system to supply ethanol being framed as maize even when it could have been created with rice in the market. So clearly the numbers say that about 12.6 to 13 million metric tons are expected of maize to go towards ethanol production. In reality, the number is likely to range between 8 to 10 million metric tons, and we will have to wait and watch. So yes, there is an optics that is gonna absorb some of these capacities, but then there are I may not use the word perverse, but then there are ecosystem dynamics which may restrict the actual use towards ethanol. And therefore, the glut could be larger than what we know that the system can absorb. But yes, farmers are the one who have suffered. And therefore, I mean, it is there. It is the open market that will have to resolve it. But I clearly see that the farmers are not the ones who should have suffered. But yeah.
Perfect. I totally agree. Now, again, already seeing the market dynamics also changing in the world, right? Yeah. Am I audible?
No, your voice is, I'm losing your voice. Sorry.
Am I audible now? Is it better? Yeah, sure. So the million-dollar question is that even the crude market is like going through a lot of ups and downs, and we have seen overall bearishness when it comes to crude oil, and prices are already historical low. And with what's happening in Venezuela, America taking over it, their production is also going to increase, and suddenly you'll find 3-4 million barrels of additional oil coming in the system pretty soon. In that scenario, does that overall ethanol policy itself is going to backfire somewhere again, because there is no incentive for OMCs to be buying ethanol, because maybe the crude would be far more cheaper, and the deltas are going to increase. So it is a fail situation for OMCs also, and the consumer is going to be cushioning it, right? If today crude is at 45 $46, so then I would ask my question to my government that why I'm being given at 105, and already there are questions about how good ethanol is in my car. So don't you think that there would be a political economics in play if the prices of crude oil further fall, and that will make again maize-based ethanol a big question mark? That's a possibility.
This is such a potent question, and that's one question we've been asking for the last few years, that where is the parity between petrol 100% and a blended petrol? And we've been told a few years back that this question is beyond the table at the moment, and we see that E20 is happening, and it's something that's going to likely sustain. So clearly, the math of it, even the science of running the cars have actually changed, but I see E20 is not going anywhere. Now, the question really on the table is E20 going to E27 or E25? That's something that I foresee not happening in the next at least 5 to 6 years, also because the feedstock availability is restricted. But I do not see, and ideally, as a researcher, we stand by first the option of wanting to choose between pure and blended fuel, and also being given the right to choose the cheaper of the forms. But as we see it, that the option really may not exist, and E20 is something that we are proceeding with going forward. Deepak ji?
Perfect. And so again, because we are having some more time, one more question to you. Now we have talked about the crude economics as well as ethanol economics. Now, one very pertinent and very important question: if something goes wrong, right, one bad year, and India, we have seen that something. Am I audible now? My apologies. So one bad monsoon, right, and suddenly there would be discussion about opening up imports of maize. That can always happen. Currently, while we had a discussion that India might not give leverage to US, right, for ethanol production going for GMO corn. I have my own doubts that actually we are too early to discount it out. It could happen, right? There are far more, I would say, factors in play. If that happens, where do you see this whole ecosystem going?
See, one, it is inevitable that every 3.5 to 4 years, India's rains are likely to suffer, at least when we look at historical data of rainfall LPA deviation and El Ninos affecting it. So we know and anticipate this is going to happen every 3.5, 4 years. But, and of course, that's happened in 23. That's going to happen in all likelihood in some years from now. But the way we see it is that and I would just try probably take that asterisk route to it, that if not feedstock, we could as well be importing ethanol if at all that's required. If not, and ethanol, by the way, may not just be needed, because if we were to just look at Niti Aayog, for 25-26, total ethanol demand is about 13.5 billion liters, of which 10.2 billion liters is required for ethanol for fuel blending. Remainder, about 3 billion liters, is already required by the system, by the pharma industries, by the others like that. So if not for fuel blending, we just could also think of importing ethanol for the other purposes. But I see that at least for fuel blending, enough ecosystem dynamics and changes are likely to happen that will support the continuation of E20, at least as a research agency. Yeah.
No, I totally agree. When actually before the Liberation Day, when I was in US, the think tanks were saying that we will push for GMO corn, but eventually we'll be happy if you import more ethanol. And I think that could be the direction going forward. Thanks a lot, Shweta ji, for such an interesting discussion and such an interesting perspective. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you. It was such a pleasure to discuss. Thank you, Deepak ji.
Yeah, perfect. So now we go on to our next speaker, and that is where from policy, let's go to an end user. And we know that actually in India, maize is used not just for ethanol as well as for food, but also for feed. And we are having a very, I would say, celebrated person who is joining us to talk about the maize and feed economics and its implications of India's poultry sector, Mr. Ricky Thaper. He's a veteran of Indian poultry industry with over 3 decades of leadership experience. As a Joint Secretary of Poultry Federation of India, he is the primary voice for the sector's feed security needs. He actively advocates for duty-free maize imports to bridge domestic shortfalls and has been critical of diversion of maize to ethanol production. With deep technical knowledge of feed formulation gained from his training in US, Ricky has a deep understanding of the feed industry. Mr. Thaper provides input to Reserve Bank of India inflation analysis team on future prices movement and food price outlook of poultry meat and feed at regular levels. Welcome, sir.
Deepak ji, and good afternoon to all of you.
Perfect.
India has
Sir,
a vast
your initial views on what you have heard so far and the overall maize dynamics, sir.
Yeah, first I'll be giving a brief data about poultry industry, and we'll come back to the questions. When we talk about poultry industry, India has a vast resources of livestock and poultry, which plays a vital role in improving the socio-economic conditions of rural masses. The Indian poultry sector has played a crucial role in meeting protein and nutritional needs of a vast section of the population. Currently, while the production of agriculture crop has been rising at a rate of 1.5 to 2% per annum, that of poultry production, eggs and broiler, has been rising at a rate of 7 to 9% per annum. Poultry production in India has been valued at $30 billion and has taken a huge leap in the last decade, emerging from conventional farming practices to commercial production system with the state-of-art technological interventions. Currently, the poultry sector is estimated to employ more than 6 million people, either directly or indirectly. The small and medium-sized poultry farms are mostly engaged in contract farming system under large integrators. At present, India is the second largest producer of eggs in the world with production of 149 billion eggs annually, and is the fifth largest producer of poultry meat with a chicken consumption is around 10 million metric tons per year. The per capita consumption of egg is 106 eggs per person per year, and the per capita consumption of chicken is 7.4 kg per person per year. Total broiler placement in India is around 5.5 billion per year. Total layer placement is approximately 300 million. Broiler breeder placement is approximately 55 million, and layer breeder placement is approximately 24 million. The rural poultry backyard poultry is in India is approximately 30 million. Deepak ji, these are just brief I gave you about the background of poultry industry, and now I'll be very happy to reply to your questions.
So very interesting. Thanks a lot. And poultry industry has been keeping the flag of Indian allied sector in agriculture high. And with the intervention of people like you, we have seen some positives. But at the same time, the number you talked about are great numbers. But actually, when we compare it to the global numbers, right, our average consumption is pretty low. And we would like it to increase further. We are already seeing pretty decent growth of 8 to 9% in the poultry industry. But even we want to go beyond that. Now, poultry industry, one of the biggest factor. I was one of the speaker in very recent large conference, which was organized by poultry manufacturing equipment manufacturing association. And there also I touch upon a point that why the poultry industry, who are also farmer driven, all those who are having these chicks and keeping all the beautiful boilers, right? They are also farmers, and we are constraining them with the cost of the feed, which is a crucial part of overall profitability of these farmers. How do you see that this push for ethanol as well as at the same time not allowing imports of maize or for that matter imports of soya meal is hampering the industry, sir?
See, when we talk about poultry feed production in India, it's approximately 28 million metric ton. The feed ingredients are mostly soybean meal and maize. About 60% of the output of maize is used as poultry and animal feed, while 20% is used for industrial use. In poultry, both broilers and layer, maize consumption is 19.78 million metric ton in 24-25, and the projection for 25-26 is 21.16 million metric ton. In dairy cattle, the maize consumption is 5.47 million metric ton in 24-25, and the projection for 25-26 is almost same, 5.74 million metric ton. In fuel ethanol, maize million metric ton in 24-25, and the projection for 25-26 is 9 million metric ton. In starch industry, maize consumption is 5.91 million metric ton, and the projection for 25-26 is 6.36 million metric ton. In human food, consumption is approximately 2 million metric ton. In alcohol, maize consumption is 0.80 million metric ton. In seed and wastage, maize consumption is around 0.82 million metric ton, and the projection for 25-26 is 0.86 million metric ton. So the total domestic demand is 42.78 million metric ton, and the production is approximately 40 million metric ton in 2024, and the projection for 25-26, the total demand will be approximately 46 million metric ton, and the expected production of maize will be around 42 million metric ton. In 24-25, there was some export of maize also, 0.50 million metric ton, and the import too was from Burma and Ukraine for 0.90 million metric ton. The poultry industry, like other agriculture sector, is subject to the supply and demand scenario, market structures, and the role of government policies. There has been increasing diversion of maize towards industrial use and the ethanol production. Due to limitation diversion of sugarcane towards the ethanol production and to meet rising demand from animal feed and biofuel manufacturing, the government is aiming to increase production of maize in 25-26 through initial measures such as crop diversification, cluster development for ethanol plants, and involving private sector in seed development. Due to surge in maize demand for ethanol production, it has already started to influence prices and corresponding the feed cost.
Perfect. So now this is where actually, it becomes very important. We also talk about the elephant in the room, the GM. So, I've been always, I would say, someone who strongly believe that Indian farmers should be given opportunity to grow GM, because what even Shweta ji talked about, our maize demand is gonna increase substantially. At the same time, our soya meal prices are at a premium, which actually eventually is paid by our livestock farmers or the poultry farmers. In that scenario, what is your take on that? How soon, or I would say that we'll reach a point where the poultry industry will have no option but to actually push government to open up GM based production of maize and soya in India.
Deepak ji, the current growth level of maize production in the country will be insufficient to meet the demand of the poultry industry. The industry associations have urged the government to allow import of GM maize and soybean because of unprecedented increase in prices, while adding that interest of domestic producers should be protected too. Several South Asian countries like Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka have already allowed import of GM maize and GM soybean and soybean meal. In August 2021, the government of India had relaxed import rules to allow the first shipment of 1.2 million metric ton of genetically modified soybean meal to support the domestic poultry industry after a record spike in feed prices. The GM soybean and soybean meal and maize import should be allowed with a fixed quota during off or non-harvesting season here, so that it does not adversely affect the farmer's price realization. Reduction in import duties on these feed ingredients in the poultry should also be announced soon. Ji Deepak ji.
Perfect, sir. So now again, coming to the protein debate, we know that India is a protein deficient country. We are a nation of where actually we are seeing a lot of challenges of nutritional security. And I believe it is one of the cheapest way of ensuring protein for our people. In that scenario, how do you see the bigger picture, right? What other than the feed, what are the other areas, right, which are required to be taken care of so that we can increase our overall production, whether it is about the animal or the eggs?
Sir, The India's population is around 1.4 billion and is projected to be approximately 1.53 billion by 2047. This increase in population directly correlates with the higher demand for food, including eggs and chicken. A report titled Vision 2047 Indian Poultry Sector by Confederation of Indian Industry has stated that the growth in the poultry sector in the country has been attributed to the commercial poultry industry, which accounts for 85% of the production, while the rest of 15% of the output comes from the traditional backyard. India has transformed their poultry farming industry through major investments in breeding, hatching, rearing, and processing of chicken. Regarding the substitute for maize, maize is a main energy source in poultry feed and soybean meal is a protein source. Maize can be partially replaced by broken rice, wheat, bajra, that's pearl millet also.
Perfect. So you believe we have to also look at other options in case we are not able to take care of our self-sufficiency in maize for poultry industry.
Yes, sir.
And that is, but at the same time for the protein substitution, there is always $1 million question, and there has always been a lot of debate about ethanol industry also trying to help through their byproduct. With that, thanks a lot, Ricky ji. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and your insights
Thank you,
and
sir.
your numbers, they have been extremely insightful for our audience. With that, I would like to go to our next speaker. So
Thank
now
you,
we are
sir.
moving.
Thank you.
Thank you. So now we are moving to Nouran. So Nouran, she is a founder and CEO of Granos Oros and serve as the country director for Egypt at the World Agriculture Forum. Based out of Cairo, she specializes in grain trading and supply chain solution across the MENA and African region. Egypt being one of the world's largest corn importers in Central and being largest corn importers in the Middle East and is central to her work. Nouran's expertise lies in connecting the global surplus origins like Brazil, Ukraine, typically I would say South America and Black Sea, with the structural deficit markets of Middle East and Africa. She is a strong advocate for sustainable trade development and women's economic empowerment in commodity trading sector. Okay, it seems there is some connection issue with Nouran. So maybe I'll go to my next speaker till the Nouran is back. So Ishan, can I go to you?
Yes, yes, Deepak, sure.
Perfect. Thanks a lot. So now let me introduce Ishan. So Ishan, typically he's the person of data, and he's a lead agriculture commodities analyst at Kpler, a multi-decade experience in trading and research. He specializes in building supply and demand balance sheet for global grains. At Kpler, he leverages real-time data on vessel movement, trade flows, currencies to provide granular market intelligence. His expertise covers the Black Sea, South America, and Asian markets, making him an authority on technical drivers of price and physical movement of commodities. So Ishan, we have heard what discussion we had so far. And yeah, I can see you sharing your screen. Okay, so please go ahead. For to you.
Great, thank you, Deepak. So I'll talk about the global context here and major global patterns, going a step ahead of what the USDA publishes and how that affects trading. Most of my clients are traders on Chicago and financial markets, so I'll have that bent in the presentation, but I'll be happy to take questions at the end. So one of the things that has been key in the corn market is oversupply this year. And we look at the S&D slightly differently. We look at every major origin monthly, and what you see here is the aggregated annual S&D for September to August. So it's mid-season for Brazil, Argentina over here. But essentially, over the last 3 years, we've seen increasing ending stocks. Yeah. So we've seen increasing ending stocks from 128 to 132 to 144. And in August of 2026, we expect a significant jump up to 170 million tons of stocks. at major exporting countries. So China is not included here. Large importers are not included. We're looking at major exporting countries because we have seen quantitatively that has a strong effect on price. So at 170 million tons, that's 26 million tons higher than last year. Most of this is coming from the US. So quickly looking at the US balance sheet, what has happened is record production in the US, mainly led by high area and high yields, and I'll come to that at the end as well. But it's important to note that our current projected exports, while less than USDA, are still record at 76 million tons, beating last year's record at 73 million tons. I think the final number is slightly higher. So it's basically all the numbers are large. High production, high yield, high acreage, high exports, high ending stocks. That's the US case this year. In the international markets, however, prices this year at this point for, let's say, the March contract are about 3 to 4% lower than last year. The question is, why are they only 3 to 4% lower than last year? And what I'll try to answer is why they're just slightly lower than last year, and what is our short-term outlook and what we expect in the next few months and through 2026. What we have seen, so the corn price in Chicago is really dependent. It's the US corn price, and it is very much related to the price at which the US exports corn. We have seen historically that it is in parts of the year where the US can monopolize global trade. That is when the US gets its own price, and that is when we see high prices. So unlike other countries where exports increase when prices are low, in the US, it's the opposite. US exports are correlated with higher prices, usually. So if we split the year, let's look at the chart on the left. If you can see, how there's a seasonality around here with the dark blue parts showing the US and the light blue showing Argentina. So in calendar year 2025, the US was dominant in exports pretty much throughout the year. All the other exporters, Brazil, Argentina, Ukraine, and Russia, had lower crops in 2025 compared to the previous year. That allowed US to stay dominant through the year and have a good control on prices despite increasing stocks at the end of the year. And historically, you can split the year into three parts roughly, where October to Jan, Ukraine is the major competitor to the US for exports. Brazil also from some of its previous crop, but mainly Ukraine in green here. Then around March to July, it's Argentina in light blue over here competing with the US. And then in the last 3 months of the US year, July, August, September, it's Brazil with its safrinha crop that competes with the US. So we look at the calendar and we examine what is the competition to the US in every month of the year. And as the other exporters stumble, the US gains more pricing power. So that's what happened in 2025. And month on month this year as well, other exporters are taking a step back. And that's why despite very high stocks, we see corn prices still pretty firm right now on Chicago. So what's just delving into a bit more detail here. So this year, in 25-26, all the other major exporters, so Argentina, Brazil, Ukraine, even Russia, have better crops than in 24-25. However, Ukraine, because of wet weather, the harvest was delayed and it couldn't come into the market as strongly as expected. Prices did not compete. US prices are lower. Brazil, too busy exporting soybeans. They like to export one thing at a time. Their pipelines are much more efficient once running one crop at a time. You can see how Brazil has a clear seasonality, first exporting soybeans through pretty much the first half of the year until August, September, and then concentrating on corn exports. So this year, the soybean export program was larger and lasted longer, relegating corn exports to second place, as well as making it less competitive to elevate corn out of Brazil. So put together, what has happened is that US corn is still the cheapest, and despite very high stocks, it continues to be the cheapest for the next 3 months. The only major competitor we can see now is perhaps Argentina, from harvesting around end of March, April, and then competing March, April onwards for a few months. So that is probably a period where you might see some relaxation in prices. Otherwise, US will continue to hold pricing power. So despite increasing stocks, despite having a lot of supply, they'll have a good control on prices, and prices should stay firm. This is an illustration how between November and December we increased our US exports. Total exports are also record, only slightly higher than the 23-24. We don't see any specific surprise demand increases this year, but just a reallocation with lower Brazil and Ukraine. US exports are higher. So it has led to this a little sort of a weird equation where you have very high stocks building up in the US, good production in other origins as well, leading up to very high global stocks at major exporters. But pricing power still mostly in the hands of the US, which has the volumes to export through the year, and therefore keeping prices strong. So this leads to a feedback loop, basically, where planting for 2026 will be affected by prices right now, and that's the next. But that's what the market will trade for the next couple of months, where in the US, for most areas, the choices between soybeans and corn, and farmers look at the soybean corn price ratio for November and December. That's right after planting. They look at that ratio to decide how much of what to plant, and our analysis shows that because of despite high corn stocks, the soybean corn price ratio is quite low because of the whole soybean story, which is another presentation. But if you look at the chart on the left, you can see in years. So there's a quantitative relationship here, but in years where the soybean corn price ratio has been high, which means soybean is pricing higher than corn, there has been a reduction in corn acreage, which is on the y-axis. And in years such as 2025, where the soybean corn price ratio was very low, there's been an increase in corn prices. We expect unchanged acreage if the soy corn ratio stays at around 2.34. Right now, it's at 2.32. It has fallen from almost 2.4 to 2.32 right now, which indicates that this year, US farmers are likely to plant more corn than last year's second highest number. They'll likely go to close to 100 million acres of corn if the soy corn ratio stays at the same level. at the bottom right, you can see how it compares to last year. So last year we were lower and we increased corn acreage significantly, reduced soybean acreage. So at these prices, at these corn prices, which in my opinion are too high, fundamentally speaking, we will encourage corn planting in the US, which will, if weather permitting, it will lead to another record crop and another very high stocks in August 2027. So the point I'm trying to make is that the pricing power is in the hands of the US because of seasonality and competition, but it is creating a poor feedback loop to the farmer, which will only increase the fundamental burden of corn stocks in the US as well as globally. And therefore, I don't think this is sustainable, and that makes me bearish corn prices on Chicago, not in the short term, but if you look at a 3 to 6 month window, fundamentals are quite bearish. That was my message. I hope that was clear, but I'm happy to take more questions.
Sure. But request you to stop sharing so that we can have
Yes.
some discussions. Yeah, so thanks a lot, Ishan, for a very, I would say, extensive and elaborate presentation. Now, I would like to pick on something which you said. US having the power to control prices, right? But at the same time, we know that one of the largest importers in the world, the China, they would be having a war chest of more than 100 million metric tons, right, as a carry. At the same time, don't you think that actually, like, they would like to ensure that the price remain low? Because if they impact negatively what we have seen in soya, it has seen in maize that actually if China uh, doesn't engage in the market, the prices can nearly crash. And then we have already seen that in corn also, they are at pretty, I'm saying, the rock bottom. They have improved a little bit, right, from their historical low, but still they're low. So don't you see that actually, like, overproduction in US is going to be a bigger challenge for US itself, because the only option they can do is that they can go down, they cannot go up.
In price?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. So on your point on China, yes, China is trying to do that, and it is hitting the limit because it can't reduce its corn imports anymore. It has gone down from importing 22 million tons to 4 million tons last year. So it can't do that for much longer. I believe the downside on price will come from US fundamentals itself. It's basically if the ratio continues at this level, the US farmer will plant a lot of corn, and that will just crash the market. And it won't wait until March for the US farmer to plant that higher corn. Prices will have to work before that to discourage the farmer from planting so much more.
And at the same time, also, like, how do you see that the push or pressure on countries like India, which has been predominantly a large corn user, on I would say that tariff maneuvers by US to see that actually they are able to open new markets. They have been trying to do that in soya. We have already seen that from Bangladesh to, like, Southeast Asia. They have been trying to push their soybean everywhere. But at the same time, we have not seen that urgency in corn. But eventually, at some point, that will also open.
Yes. So right now the focus is on soybeans, and if you look at the way the US is trying to handle the situation, it's not very successful. But their approach is that we will destroy the free market and then start negotiating deals to create our own market. That has been if you call the deal with China successful on soybeans, then maybe on soybeans it has been successful. But on corn is a much more diversified crop in terms of trade. So there's no one country that imports 60% of the world's corn like China does for soybeans. So in corn, that is much more difficult for the US to do, and it has no other option but to play in the free market by free market rules. So any barriers it creates and then tries to remove in terms of deal will not work in corn. There are more competitors in corn. There's Ukraine, whereas in soybeans, it's just the Americas. So yeah, so in corn, the US has to participate in the free market.
Perfect. With that, thanks a lot, Ishan. It was a pleasure talking to you and give a great perspective. And with that, I would like to move to Nouran. And she's been waiting, unfortunately, because of some technical issue. She logged out, and then we have to, take on Ishan. So, Nouran, thanks a lot. It's a pleasure to have you. And we have already introduced you. If you can start your video, that would be great. Hey, Nouran, you are on mute if you can. Yes. Thanks a
Yes, I
lot.
can hear you now.
Thanks a lot for joining. And it's always a pleasure.
Welcome.
And you come from a beautiful country, and I'm a big fan of Egypt. And
Oh, thank you so much.
and at the same time, you being part of the World Agriculture Forum, where also I happen to be the part of the Global Council. Welcome
Perfect.
from that part as well. So very interesting part, Lauren. So I would like to understand from you, how do you see the global geoeconomics impacting the import of maize, specifically in the
Nice.
region you are active, Middle East? Because from Black Sea to Latin America, the options are
Yeah,
a lot. And how do you take
indeed.
care of that?
Yes. So first of all, thank you for having me today. It's a pleasure to join this discussion. And as we all know, maize is one of the most important commodities, and for Egypt and definitely for MENA region, especially because of its role in animal feed and food security in all the countries, not only also the MENA region. Over the past few years, we've seen big changes in global trade, as we all know, flows, and we can see new supply origins becoming stronger also. I will talk about this in details according to your questions, of course, and logistic pressures that continue to shape final import costs. So all of this had made direct impact of how countries like Egypt buy maize, secure supply, and manage price risk. So let me now take your questions, and accordingly, I will be able to answer.
Sure. So, are you seeing already there's some trade alignment where actually, the focus is more on Latin America than Black Sea because of some of the constraint we have seen, the Black Sea premium, right? Because of the logistic, because of the insurance, right? It is
Mhm.
adding a lot of cost. At the same time, there is ample availability from South America of corn. Do you see that, the things are gonna further tilt towards South America?
Yes, of course. I want to say that I didn't have enough time. It was a very short notice just to make any slides. So maybe I will share this with you later. But let me talk about numbers now verbally.
Sure, please.
Yes, we are seeing clear diversification in maize sourcing, especially in Egypt. So let me talk about 2025. Egypt imported around 11.39 million tons of maize, which is a huge number. And definitely it's increasing. And the main suppliers were Brazil, where Egypt imported 7 million, around 7 million tons in 2025 only. Argentinian was 1.85 million tons. Ukrainian was 1 million tons. USA, 716,000 tons. Romanian took around 205,000 tons, while we saw Serbian. We have never seen Serbian corn a lot in the Egyptian market, but it started to show up. And this is a highlight of the diversification of maize sourcing in Egypt. It's a very low quantity, but we can see it in the Egyptian market for amount of 32,000 tons. So the numbers clearly show that Brazil has now become Egypt's leading maize supplier, not only depending on the Black Sea, not Ukraine, but this doesn't mean that we are not abounding the US or Ukrainian corn.
Right. No, see, when there is also a lot of talk about maize being used not just for feed, which is predominantly, I would say, usage in Egypt, but also going forward in ethanol as well as for other purposes like industrial maize usage. Are you seeing in Egypt, that ethanol being also a possibility going forward? Currently, I know that infrastructure is not there, but going forward, do you see that as a possibility?
There will be a possibility, of course, as long as it's already on the table. In many exporting countries, maize is also used as biofuel and energy, as you said, not only for food and feed. So this creates three key factors, as we all know. When fuel demand rises, more maize goes to ethanol, tightening supply. Maize prices may move together with energy markets, and exporters often protect domestic energy program first. So for important countries like Egypt, this means we must plan long term, and I think it's already in the process of planning to use maize for energy and biofuel. We must diversify origins, and we must build storage and resilience. So food security is now closely linked to energy markets and policies, not only farming.
Right. And also, we have also seen that Egypt has been doing a lot of positive work when it comes to the sustainability and own agriculture. Right. There have been a lot of push of creating self-sustainability in agriculture. Are you seeing that actually,
Yes.
like, the production of Egypt is going to be increasing because it is just not for its own market. It also act as a leader in overall, I would say, the North Africa and even the Sub-Saharan Africa. Your views on that, Egypt's own interest in growing corn?
Yes, we can see this, but the main focus now is on wheat, not only corn. What I see in the agriculture development in Egypt, that we have a huge focus on wheat. So I can't see now the full plan of growing maize in Egypt, but what we can see is a huge progress in growing wheat. So we are looking forward by 2030, maybe we can have not, I can say full, but at least we can cover the consumption for Egyptians, and the amount of import should go less according to what we're going to grow in wheat. In maize, I can't see any clear plans for now to stop importing. No, that's not in the plan, I think.
And this reduced price of maize, do you think that it is positively impacting or increases the demand in other countries other than Egypt in the region?
For the prices, you mean?
The prices of maize, they have been pretty low, like, of late, when we compare it to previous seasons. Do you see that has created a little bit more demand when it comes to other parts of the region you act?
That's what we see, but according to the numbers, no, we can see we're still importing huge numbers of maize. As I told you, in 2025, that was a huge number as well.
And any views on some US Egypt FTA happening soon, the free trade agreements, or did you see that it's still a little bit far off?
You mean the agreements? Can you repeat this again, please?
Yes, agreement. So, like, just like every other country, right? They are looking for a free trade agreement with US. Did you see that Egypt is also in that line, and it is going to happen sometime soon? Any talks around
Maybe,
it?
but no, I think what we're going to have is better connections with the Black Sea and Brazil rather than the US. Because numbers speaks as well. If you can see that the numbers of importing Brazilian maize is way larger than it's like 7 times importing from the US. So I don't see this on the plan right now. We're looking for more sources rather than the US.
And now, last question to you, very important. Being a trader of so many years, what would be your advice for those who are trading in maize? Do you think they should continue the just-in-time mechanism, or there is a possibility at this price to consolidate and see to it that you do holding of maize and then maybe sell it at a premium in later time? That's a possibility in your region?
In our country, the prices are not stable at all. And that's what we can see. If it's not a season, you can see the price dropping. And that's why it's not actually a very good idea that we can sell maize in premium or store it in Egypt. It's better always to buy on demand. That's what I can advise here, because what we saw the past year, that it didn't actually work to have maize sold in premium.
Right. So your advice would be just trade immediately rather than taking positions and going
According
long
to the
on
demand,
maize.
yes, of course.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Nouran,
Yes.
for being part of this discussion. And
Most welcome, dear.
We really appreciate. Thanks a lot. Inshallah,
It's
we'll
a
see you
pleasure
soon.
talking to you all, of course. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care. So now I go to my next speaker, and again, we had a lot of discussion on ethanol, and it's pertinent to have someone who actually have been in the industry and who have been making ethanol out of maize. And for that, we are happy to welcome Mr. Kushaal Bothra. He serves as the Vice President of Grain at TruAlt Bioenergy, one of India's leading biofuel producers. In his role, he sits at the intersection of agriculture and energy, managing the procurement of grains for ethanol distillation. His profile involves navigating the complex procurement landscape to secure consistent feedstock for the massive capacity which TruAlt Bioenergy is having. He represents the new industrial customer of maize, that is the ethanol distillers. Thanks a lot, Kushaal, to join.
Thank you, Deepak ji. Thank you for having me here. It is a pleasure to be at your platform and you know discuss about all the things which are currently the hot cake in the market. So yeah.
Yeah, ethanol is a hot cake and hot drink both. Kushal, I would like to understand from you, when we talk about ethanol, right, there has been already a lot of talks around, the ethanol industry, especially when it is grain-based industry, going through a challenge of overcapacities. Your initial views and your initial perception of industry, how do you see things panning out in this season and beyond?
So if I talk about the grain-based ethanol industry per se, I can say that currently the industry is facing the overcapacity. Almost 350 distilleries are present, which are currently operational in the market. And if we see the conjoined capacity out of the data, it is 1,990 crore liters, which can be supplied through overall ethanol capacity, out of which 1,300 crore liters can be supplied through maize or grain-based distilleries. So yeah, I can say that that we are facing a overcapacity issue, which is very true in the market. So, and despite of the fact, we don't have any other source of uh, any source which helps us to to help to maintain that oversupply in the market. There's no other market for that. So that is also a very challenging situation.
Right. So Kushal, again, continuing on the same chain of thought, I totally agree that there is oversupply, overcapacity, right, when it comes to the overall infrastructure for in basic terms. But at the same time, the overall increasing from E20 to E25 seems to be far-fetched, right? But at the same time, that definitely energy demand in India would be keep on increasing, and we'll be consuming more fuel for our vehicles, and hence, if 20% of ethanol, so you see 7 to 8% increase year on year in the ethanol demand. Don't you see that actually it is better to grow gradually, because pushing for E25 or E30 or a flexi fuel, it doesn't look, I would say, too practical to start with. Government has been very agile in ensuring that at least we prepone the E20 itself. But going forward, it could be a bigger risk for the government, energy security and food security both. If they try to become too fast, just we have come touch E20 and then suddenly we start moving towards E25 without even stabilizing. So how do you see the push from the industry for government to buy more ethanol? And as you rightly said, that actually what government is going to do with that ethanol?
That's the issue what all people are facing right now. Like this is the burning issue in the industry right now. But moreover, we have always seen, if we see the governmental policy, we have always seen that India runs on a repent and repair approach rather than a reformative approach. That's the main issue which we face in every commodity, be it maize, be it soybean, be it, because I also come from edible oil sector. I've seen how the people, how the feed people, and how the people were actually facing issues pertaining to soybean, soy meal. Earlier, we were the largest exporters of soy meal from India to our neighboring countries. Now we are not into parity. A lot of issues are there. Similarly, if we see in maize, that's the same issue which is going on. That government has not developed that infrastructure to to mobilize and to stabilize the ethanol supply in the market, because currently the mandate is of 20%. Government wanted it to go to up to 27% of blending into fuel. And currently if we see the overall average price of purchasing an ethanol is 71.55 rupees, which is far more than a refined petrol. So that we have to see, we have to adjust our dynamics with the markets, not with the capacity which we are having, because we just follow the rules and we just go with the flow. But we have to analyze before going forward to make it a more sustainable industry. We need to focus on the analysis and sustainability in terms of capacity, in terms of what will be the alternatives for the same. So that's the current situation in the market.
No, I totally agree. In fact, Kushal, actually, you are among very few people who have been very candid enough, right, to flag that out that actually, government can take a call and decide and speak whatever they want. But end of the day, the people who are putting capital investment, they have to be looking at the facts, the data, that what possible outcome on the demand could be. Now that also bring me to very pertinent question that luckily we are having a good availability of maize as of now. But you know that in India, like agriculture is seasonal. So do you think that this is the prices which we are seeing, very interesting prices, unlike what happened last year, is a
Right.
good price for for people like you to be building inventory rather than actually take just in time approach, which most of the players did last year?
Well, last year, as you know, that lot of traders suffered, high inventories, and because the diversion happened suddenly, there was no plan of government to divert 5.2 million tons of FCI rice to the ethanol pipeline. So because we were having logisticals issue and the warehousing issues, and government is having a surplus of almost a very good amount of quantity for rice, so they also knew that in the upcoming season they will not be having that capacity to store that rice. And at the same point of time in 23 they have seen that the maize prices has reached around 30 rupees. So in order to balance it out, they did that, they diversified their feedstock portfolio. So currently we are having record crops in every of the sector, like in every of the feedstock, if I say. So rice is also one of the leading production numbers we have. Maize also we are having around 44 million tons of production this year. And sugar also, if I say, we are having a good amount of production if we compare it with the last year. So balancing out a feedstock is pretty important. And to develop an inventory is a little difficult challenge, because the OMCs, they buy on cycles. So in every cycle they particularly allocated a particular feedstock, by which we have to supply that feedstock. Sorry, we have to supply the ethanol from that feedstock. So for example, currently the sugar season is going on, so we'll be supplying most of our ethanol from sugar. And after that, when cycle 2 will come in quarter 2, quarter 3, we'll be supplying from maize or from rice. So it totally depends upon like how the allocation has happened. That is also
Right,
important. So we
right.
cannot build the inventory basis that the prices are pretty low.
Right. And so at the same time, how, I understand the cycles. At the same time, to differentiate a ethanol which is made from sugar molasses or sugar syrup or maize or rice is so difficult. So do you think that even that spillover effect happen, that actually if at a given time a specific feedstock is at a low price, even while you are talking about delivery through feedstock based of sugarcane or sugar molasses or syrup, but people might be supplying made up of maize or something else. Those type of spillovers happen, or there is a very strong regulatory mechanism, because I'm not aware actually how that does work.
So there is currently, as Shwetaji also said previously, there is no differentiation which is there that can support that whether the same has been produced from sugar syrup, or whether it is from maize or whether it is from rice. So that again is a very difficult thing to differentiate. So there is no determination factor where we can say that the same that the ethanol is being produced from a particular feedstock.
Right. So you also believe that actually that sometimes things do happen where actually maize-based ethanol is being produced by rice, or rice-based ethanol could be produced by
Well,
sugar molasses. That's a
I
possibility.
well, at this point of time, I cannot comment on the same, because maybe there might be a possibility, there might not be a
No, I'm just
possibility.
talking about possibility, whether people are doing it or not. I'm not asking that. I'm saying that there is a possibility. There is no very strong regulatory mechanism to
Yeah,
do checks and
there is no
balances.
regulatory mechanism and any checks or balances which are there for the same.
Now, Kaushal, if I have to ask you, someone who's been practicing this sector, which is, I would say, it's in infancy, it is just developing up. What would be your expectation as a policy from the government? What you believe that these A, B, C, D, E, F, G, the government should do, so that actually that it is viable for the industry. Whether it is viable for the farmers or not, that is secondary. But I'm saying that though, as a private, I'm saying that for this discussion per se, okay, let's understand that what industry practitioner want from the government for ensuring that actually their investment and return of investment are sufficiently good enough to ensure they're above the water.
Well, if I particularly talk about this, I believe that government should develop a holistic procurement basket for all the commodities because it's a sensitive commodity, like it's essential commodity. It comes under essential commodity. So, yeah, am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible.
Yeah. So, since it's a price sensitive commodity and we are a agrarian state as well, so government needs to understand that they need to find the balance, they need to strike out the balance between energy creators and energy suppliers, because what I can say with the current scenario is the farmers, they are not only food producers, they are energy producers as well. So to in order to sustain the industry, because energy producers need to distribute that commodity for for commercial purpose, but the underlying issue is that every time we will not be having the same sort of surplus, because one adverse weather cycle will impact a lot of will impact a lot of things in the production. So what I believe is government should have an optimum utilization of the procurement basket. They should decide that they should give ample of or enough resources to decide farmer that whether how much quantity or how much of the acreage should be diverted to a particular commodity or to a particular produce, because that will again help us to maintain a balance between the demand and supply. Otherwise every year we'll be discussing on the same thing that demand and supply, there is always a gap which will always be there, but the issue is uh, there is no mitigation for that. So the arbitrage issue will always be there. So, and secondly, the government should develop the resources for end users. Like currently, we are not sure that how the government is going to make a move for further blending, because government wants to go for 25%, 27% ethanol blending, but there is no clear roadmap. Because in 2021, as per the report of Niti Aayog, there was a diversion of 55% from sugar. So the industry invested almost 40,000 crores for production of ethanol from sugar syrup. But now the allocation is only hardly 28%. So the capex which is being involved and the resources which are being involved of industries, government should take care of it, because if industry will not survive, how we gonna support the economy?
No, I totally agree with you, and this is where actually it also become important that the investment in ethanol 2.0. Do you see that's a something which a company like yours would also be exploring, because there the feedstock is not that much dependent on government policy. It's availability is there. Maybe on the output side, definitely the government will always play the big brother's role because OMC predominantly are control. They give the allocation. But do you see that ethanol, second generation ethanol could be a possible extension for those who want to do a further capital investment in ethanol sector rather than again building more capacities around sugar or maize or rice?
Again, the issue is of the feedstock, and secondly capex. So the capex is two times more than what the current 1G ethanol plant is being established. So the cost of investment is more in comparison to what 1G has. Secondly, feedstock will be the issue. Like we are not sure that how that residual waste will going to come upon, and whether we'll be able to have that availability. Because if you see, we are also developing a sustainable aviation fuel plant, and sustainable aviation fuel is also among one of the topic which is currently is a very hot topic, because the aviation industry also wants to cut down the emissions. So currently, across the globe, people are facing issue of raw material, that is feedstock, because mostly they are using UCO, that is used cooking oil, and but still there is a gap of demand and supply. Like demand is more and supply is less. So that can also happen in the 2G ethanol space as well. So until and unless there is no surety, like how the feedstock movement will be there, till that time we will not be able to comment any sort of visibility, that there will be a visibility that 2G ethanol will be more viable. Because again it will be a cost to government and cost to the producer, because as the technology is expensive, so that capex, that ROI will be, again it will go for a toss.
Right. Now, last question to you, question like, we talked about ethanol, but there is also a byproduct called DDGS.
Yeah.
Do you see that actually like, some effort being put in to ensure that like, the DDGS quality is improved to the level where people get comfortable about it? Because we have seen the challenges of whether it is about like, availability of contamination in DDGS and the quality of DDGS has been always keeping like, industry, especially when we talk about poultry industry, right, little bit, I would say, not too keen on using DDGS as a protein source. They would love to have maize as an energy source, but when it comes to DDGS as a protein source, there is always a little bit of apprehension. Same apprehension we have seen, not to that extent, but also in cattle feed industry also. Do you see like some capacities being built to make the DDGS, I would say, uh, having standardized specification so that it can cater to such industries?
The work is already going on in that space. So uh, at the beginning, there was issue. People were facing mycotoxin, aflatoxin issue, because of which our quality is not that exportable to to the world market. And firstly, we need to work upon the source, that is maize. If the maize quality will be good, we'll be able to get a very good output of DDGS. That is pretty important. And after that, there is a process of production which also needs to be taken care. So if all these two things will be aligned, then your end product will always be having a good amount of quality, which is basically a need of R in the market. Because now, since poultry and feed people, they are facing the issues of market volatility. Since soybean, they are using soya DOC, they are using DORB, they are using rapeseed meal, everything. So in which maize DDGS or rice DDGS can act as a substitute, or it can help them to manage their cost and cost and everything. So it can act as a catalyst, but not as a whole product for the industry.
Yeah, I totally agree. So, Kushal, before I let you go, because you touched upon the like the quality of corn, and we have seen that like the when a distillery in US is able to produce close to 430 liters of ethanol per ton of maize, in India we are still struggling between 360 to 380. And this is where actually, do you think how we can become more efficient? Like do you think like the ethanol producer distilleries, they need to work with the farmer to ensure that like we grow corn which is having a better starch and sugar availability so that we can have better yields?
Yeah, that's true. Like currently, the yield which we are getting from our maize is around 58 to 60% of starch. And if we compare it with US, it is far less. So even their feedstock is almost 17% cheaper than us. So that makes a huge difference. So yeah, at least we need to work upon the quality, and like I think a lot of research is happening in that space as well. How to improve the starch content in the maize, and almost like people are working on that, and maybe I hope that uh, we'll get a good news in few days or in few years.
Right. Now, again, because you touched on the US numbers, we are already having some negotiations going around negotiations and US. Would you welcome, in case, two points, right? Would you welcome allowing duty-free import for blending of ethanol from US, or you'll prefer uh, duty-free import of GMO corn farm ethanol from US? What would be your choice?
Well, as a producer, it will always be a duty-free import of maize rather than duty-free import of ethanol. So again, but that is a very subjective question. So because we as a country do not welcome GMO, so that's again a very interesting thing. And secondly, we are having a very good crop right now. So we don't need that US GMO crop to be imported in India. But yeah, the trade tussle is still going on, and what will happen, that is again a very subjective question. So because it will hurt the sentiment of farmers, so I don't believe that it should happen like that way, that that US is imposing to, comparing, because they are also having a very good amount of crop. This year also they are having around 378 million metric tons of crop. So that's a very huge amount. And
No,
maybe
no, I appreciate you like in looking at the farmer sentiment, but end of the day, whether our farmers or whether our distillers, if they are not able to have world-class facility to have efficiency equivalent to some of the best in the world, then eventually we lose out the battle. So I would say that I totally take your sentiment, but end of the day, like inefficiency cannot be continued as a protection, right?
that's
We'll
true.
have to emerge out of that mindset. You rightly said 17% additional, right, cost which you are already having. So you cannot become sustainable. And eventually, the government would also love, or even ethanol industry would also love that they are having parity where they are able to export ethanol out of India.
Right.
And that efficient, not only just dependent, because you rightly said in the starting, we don't have option. We have to only give it to the OMCs. But if we are economically viable and we are benchmarked at the world's best, then there is a possibility that the global market can also
Because
become
we
an
have a
option for
geographical
us.
advantage. We have a largest
Yes,
consuming markets across us. So definitely
right.
if this happens, then we'll be having a good window for exports.
Perfect. So, Kushal, let's work towards making Indian ethanol industry more efficient. Thanks a lot. It was always a pleasure
Pleasure,
to talk to
Deepakji.
you. Thanks a
Same
lot
here.
for joining us. Yeah.
Thank you, Deepakji.
So
Thank you.
now we are off to our last speaker. We are having Mr. Bimal Bengani ji, and Mr. Bengani ji is having illustrious, I would say, career. He has been one of the strongest exporters of to SAARC nations from India. So he runs as a managing director, Bengani Group, a Calcutta-based trading powerhouse founded in way back in 1997. He is specializing in import and export of agro commodities like maize, soya, wheat. He is having more than 25 years of trading experience. He is credited with encouraging maize production in Bihar and reviving sick meals units in West Bengal. His group operates across the value chain from trading to procuring to processing, including the flour mills, giving him a holistic view of the East India maize trade. Sometime in our friendly circle, he is also known as Maize King. And with him, let's go to Mr. Bimal. Thank you, sir, for joining this discussion.
Thank you very much, Deepak ji.
So, sir, आपसे straight simple question, sir. Bangladesh used to import, right? अभी we are seeing challenges. How do you see the trade between India और Bangladesh? किस तरह से ये आगे बढ़ेगा, sir? Do you see some challenges there?
बांग्लादेश में अभी प्रेजेंटली तो चैलेंजेज है, और बांग्लादेश के जो मेज और सोयाबीन के जो भी बायर है, मैक्सिमम 90% डाइवर्ट हो गए यूएस, ब्राजील, अर्जेंटीना की तरफ में, क्योंकि बीच में अपने यहाँ रेट थोड़ा ज्यादा था, तो वो डाइवर्ट हो गए हैं। और अभी उनको जो ब्राजील अर्जेंटीना की मक्का है, वो उनको क्वालिटी भी अच्छी लगती है, इवन दो जीएमओ क्रॉप, तो उनका इंटरेस्ट ज्यादा उसी में ज्यादा है और बल्क में वो खरीदते हैं। तो उनके लिए सबकी फैक्ट्री जो है नदी रिवर पोर्ट पे है, तो उनके लिए ट्रांसपोर्ट भी इजियर रहता है। चिटागांव
जी
पोर्ट से बाई बार्ज अपनी फैक्ट्री में ले जाते हैं, तो उनके लिए इजियर रहता है। तो बांग्लादेश एक तरह से अपने यहाँ से पहले भी आउट हो चुका था मक्का और सोया के बायर के हिसाब से, टाइम बिंग थोड़ा बहुत क्वांटिटी ले रहा था। वो भी अभी जो लास्ट अगस्त में जो हुआ है कांड, उसके बाद में अनस्टेबिलिटी है वहां पे टिल न्यू गवर्नमेंट फॉर्म। अभी उनके फरवरी में इलेक्शन अनाउंस हुए हैं, और फरवरी में उनके बाद कैसा रहता है। और अभी जो नई बीएनपी पार्टी है, उससे भी हमारे फॉरेन मिनिस्टर जयशंकर जी मिल के आए हैं। तो होपफुली फरवरी के बाद बांग्लादेश के बीच में ट्रेड थोड़ा अच्छा होने का चांस है।
राइट सर। और सर ये अभी आपने देखा कि मक्के के भाव इतने गिरे हुए हैं, राइट, अब जो लास्ट ईयर से हम जब कंपेयर करते हैं, तो ओवरऑल आपको क्या लगता है कि बिहार का किसान इस बार अभी सीजन के अंदर मक्का उगाएगा? बिकॉज काफी काफी गिर गए हैं भाव।
नहीं, भाव इतने गिरने के बावजूद भी बिहार के किसान मक्का ही उगाएंगे। मक्का उनकी पहली पसंद है, और मक्का चूंकि गोल्ड क्रॉप है, जो भी भाव माल बिक जाता है, माल बिकने में कोई परेशानी नहीं होती है, भाव जो भी हो। बट ये जो इतने लोअर भाव हुए हैं, तो उससे अपने पास नेक्स्ट ईयर खरीफ के टाइम में अपने को दिक्कत आ सकती है। अभी जो प्रोडक्शन अपना लास्ट 5 ईयर्स के अंदर में 22 मिलियन से या 24 मिलियन से 44 मिलियन हुआ है लास्ट 5 सालों में। तो काफी ज्यादा मक्का का क्रॉप बढ़ा है। मक्के के क्रॉप में किसान को खर्चा भी कम है, लेकिन थोड़ा सा प्राइस बेटर है। आप अभी जैसे 17 रुपया 16 रुपया किलो मक्का मिल रही है, तो वो थोड़ा प्राइसेस नीचे है। 2021 जो कॉस्ट है, उसमें अगर रहेगा तो मक्का का प्रोडक्शन और भी बढ़ेगा अपने इंडिया में।
नहीं, और आपको क्या लगता है कि सर ये जितनी जो काफी कुछ इथेनॉल प्रोड्यूसिंग इंडस्ट्रीज आई हैं, खासकर बिहार के आसपास, उनका
हाँ,
जो फीडस्टॉक डिमांड भी काफी ज्यादा है, तो इस बार वो पोजीशन लेंगे ही, क्योंकि इतने सस्ते में अगर अगर मक्का मिल रहा है, तो आपको लगता है कि वो है ना इम्पैक्ट कर सकता है थोड़ा सा बिहार का रबी का स्विंग के ऊपर या प्राइसेस के ऊपर? क्योंकि अभी सस्ते में लेके स्टॉक करना थोड़ा सा उनके लिए ज्यादा वायबल ऑप्शन है।
नहीं, डेफिनेटली सस्ते में एक हुआ, दूसरा बात हुआ कहीं से भी लाएंगे तो ट्रांसपोर्टेशन हाइयर होगा ना।
जी,
तो डेफिनेटली बिहार में स्टॉक होगा ही होगा, और बिहार का प्रोडक्शन लास्ट ईयर से कम होने की कोई चांस नहीं है। जो सीड सेलिंग हुई है उस हिसाब से लास्ट ईयर अगर बिहार और बंगाल मिला करके 60 से 65 लाख टन का क्रॉप था, तो इस बार भी 60 से 65 लाख टन बिहार बंगाल मिला करके क्रॉप आ जाएगा। और बिहार में स्टॉक भी होगा, स्टॉक वहां गोडाउन काफी बने हैं, और एक्चुअल यूजर भी स्टॉक करेंगे ही करेंगे। तो अगर वो महाराष्ट्र से या एमपी से मक्का खरीदते हैं, तो उनको 2 से 3 रुपया किलो तो ट्रांसपोर्ट एडिशनल मिल जाता है। तो इस बोल के
राइट
बिहार में स्टॉक हो गया।
सर। अभी एक और आपका एक और रोल रहा है कि आप सीओ के अंदर काफी एक्टिव रहे हैं, और काफी इंपॉर्टेंट रोल प्ले किया है आपने जो ईस्टर्न इंडिया के अंदर। सर आपका अगर सरकार से अगर आपको कोई डिमांड रखनी हो, तो आप मक्के के रिलेटेड, तो आपके वो क्या 3-4 पॉइंट होंगे पॉलिसी के जो सरकार को करने चाहिए? बिकॉज हम भी जानते हैं कि किसान को भी नुकसान है, अभी मेज इथेनॉल प्रोड्यूसिंग कंपनीज को भी नुकसान है, ट्रेड को भी नुकसान है। तो अभी हम कहाँ देखते हैं कि हम एटलीस्ट मक्के के एक्सपोर्ट के ऊपर कहीं ना कहीं पे वर्कआउट कर सके? आपको लगता है वो एक पॉसिबिलिटी है?
अभी वर्ल्ड मार्केट मार्केट अगर देखे तो अपने इंडिया सबसे हाइयर में थे। अभी भी मक्का बांग्लादेश उतना एक्सपोर्ट नहीं हो रहा है, बहुत छोटी क्वांटिटी में जा रहा है। इसको मक्के को किसान को अगर करना है, तो सरकार अगर एथनॉल को किसी भी तरह एक्सपोर्ट करने का करे, सब्सिडी दे के भी एक्सपोर्ट करे, जिससे कि एथनॉल की जो कैपेसिटी है वो पूरी 100% यूटिलाइज हो। अभी जो लास्ट एथनॉल का उन्होंने दिया है, काफी आदमी को तो 50% ही मिला है कोटा। तो 50% में अपना इंडस्ट्री कैसे चला पाएंगे? नई इंडस्ट्री लगी है तो वो तो सिक हो जाएगी ना। तो गवर्नमेंट को जो इथनॉल है, जो जितने भी यूनिट लगे हैं, उनकी इथनॉल उनको परचेज करनी ही चाहिए पूरी की पूरी। चाहे अपने इंडिया में यूज नहीं हो, तो उसको एक्सपोर्ट का कोई रास्ता बनाए कि किस तरह इथनॉल अपन एक्सपोर्ट कर पाए।
नहीं सर, दैट इज अ वेरी गुड आपका सजेशन है कि गवर्नमेंट को इंसेंटिवाइज करना चाहिए इंडस्ट्री को, जिससे किसान को भी नुकसान नहीं हो, उसका भी प्रोडक्शन जो भी हुआ है वो परचेज हो सके, और हमारी ओवर कैपेसिटी जो है वो यूटिलाइज हो, और चाहे इसके लिए जरूरत पड़े तो हम इंसेंटिव भी दे सकते हैं एक्सपोर्ट के लिए। और ग्लोबल मार्केट, आई थिंक आज नहीं तो कल हिंदुस्तान को ग्लोबल मार्केट की तरफ देखना पड़ेगा, क्योंकि जिस तरह की कैपेसिटीज हम बना रहे हैं, हम सिर्फ ओएमसी परचेज के ऊपर इथेनॉल इंडस्ट्री को नहीं छोड़ सकते। वेरी एक्सीलेंट इनपुट, थैंक यू बिमल जी फॉर ज्वाइनिंग। अच्छा एक और क्वेश्चन, तो नेपाल में कुछ जा रहा है क्या मक्का? नेपाल जाता है?
नेपाल जा रहा है, नेपाल जा रहा है, अभी बिहार से नेपाल जा रहा है मक्का। नेपाल हमारे यहाँ से ही लेगा, क्योंकि बाहर से अगर वो लेता है तो उसको कम से कम $30 का एडिशनल एक्सपेंसेस पड़ता है। आज बांग्लादेश बाहर से लिया है, मेरे ख्याल से लोवेस्ट में उनका बार्गेन $232 C&F हुआ है। 232 से लेकर 248 तक उन्होंने करीबन 5 से 6 वेसल का काम किया हुआ है। लेकिन नेपाल अगर बाहर से खरीदता है तो उसको $35 एडिशनल कॉस्ट लगता है, जो सीपोर्ट इंडिया का यूज करेंगे, और इंडिया से अपने नेपाल ले जाने के लिए उनको $35 एडिशनल देने पड़ेंगे। तो नेपाल हर समय ही अपना ही बाहर रहेगा, वो कहीं जाने की जगह नहीं है नेपाल को। अगर बहुत ज्यादा हमारे यहाँ तेजी नहीं हो जाए तब तक तो नेपाल हमारा कंटिन्यू बाहर रहेगा मक्के का।
तो नेपाल के अंदर काफी पोल्ट्री इंडस्ट्री भी काफी डेवलप्ड है, तो उसके अंदर भी डीडीजीएस का भी आपको लगता है फ्यूचर के अंदर अच्छा स्कोप है? क्योंकि अभी तो हम ज्यादातर मक्का भेज रहे हैं, लेकिन फ्यूचर में डीडीजीएस भी जा सकता है वहां पे?
डीडीजीएस अभी प्रेजेंट में नेपाल भी जा रहा है, बांग्लादेश भी जा रहा है, वियतनाम भी जा रहा है।
ओके,
प्रेजेंट में ही जा रहा है अभी। तो डीडीजीएस हमारे यहाँ से मक्के का डीडीजीएस आराम से जा रहा है। राइस डीडीजीएस में शायद बांग्लादेश में कोई रिस्ट्रिक्शन है इंपोर्ट का, तो इस बोल के राइस नहीं जा रहा। मेज डीडीजीएस वियतनाम और बांग्लादेश और नेपाल तीनों जगह ही जा रहा है। बट डीडीजीएस की अभी स्टार्टिंग में हमारी क्वालिटी काफी इंफीरियर थी, तो यूएस से काफी डिफरेंस से सेल हो रही थी। अब जो भी इंडस्ट्री नई है, अब उन्होंने क्वालिटी भी सुधारी है, थोड़ी क्वालिटी सुधरी है डीडीजीएस की। थोड़ी इथनॉल वाले को डीडीजीएस की क्वालिटी और बेटर कैसे हो पाए और कैसे माने कोई भी तरह का हार्म नहीं रहे बर्ड को, तो उस हिसाब से अफ्लाटॉक्सिन का जो मैटर है उसको कैसे कर सकते हैं, इसका कोई रास्ता हो तो और बेटर हो जाएगा उनका रियलाइजेशन।
राइट।
अच्छा, एक आपसे मैं क्वेश्चन कर रहा हूं, ये अफ्लाटॉक्सिन हटाने का कोई सिस्टम है? जैसे मेज में अगर अफ्लाटॉक्सिन है तो उसको हटाने का कोई सिस्टम या कोई टेक्निक है?
सर बिल्कुल उसकी टेक्निक है, उसमें कैपिटल इन्वेस्टमेंट होता है, और नहीं तो जनरली अगर आप प्रोक्योरमेंट के टाइम ही अगर आपने जो इनपुट है उस पर ध्यान दिया है, आपने इंश्योर किया है कि कंटेमिनेशन पूरे सिस्टम में कहीं पे नहीं है, तो काफी हद तक ये प्रॉब्लम सॉल्व की जा सकती है। बहुत बहुत बड़ी प्रॉब्लम नहीं है, लेकिन आई थिंक ये इग्नोरेंस और जो चलता है एटीट्यूड कई बार आ जाता है उसके कारण ये प्रॉब्लम आती है। बाकी दुनिया भर के अंदर काफी ऐसी टेक्निक्स हैं जिसके अंदर हम इंश्योर कर सकते हैं कि रॉ मटेरियल से लेके प्रोडक्शन तक अफ्लाटॉक्सिन काफी हद तक आइदर नॉन प्रेजेंट रहे या उसके रेसिड्यू लेवल इतने कम हो कि वो आपके स्टैंडर्ड स्पेसिफिकेशन को इजीली टेक केयर ऑफ कर सके। तो सर पॉसिबिलिटीज हैं, अब आपके साथ मिलकर इथेनॉल इंडस्ट्री से बात करेंगे कि किस तरह से इसको इम्प्रूव किया जा सके, क्योंकि किसी और कंट्री को प्रीमियम है।
अफ्लाटॉक्सिन होने का कारण क्या है? क्या माने जो मिट्टी वहां का है, क्या कारण है इसका?
सर सोर्स में इटसेल्फ हो जाता है। जब मक्का अगर ओवर ऑक्सीडाइज होता है, अगर उसका ढंग से स्टोरेज नहीं किया गया है, तो इसका प्रोडक्शन वहां से ही चालू हो जाता है, फिर वो अक्रॉस द चेन चलता है। क्योंकि अगर उसको एलिमिनेट करने का, रिमूव करने का अगर कोई मैकेनिज्म नहीं डालते, तो जब आपके रॉ मटेरियल के अंदर ही कंटेमिनेशन है, तो वो आपके फाइनल प्रोडक्ट तक वो कंटेमिनेशन आता है। इथेनॉल में तो एफ्लाटॉक्सिन का एक्सट्रैक्शन नहीं होता है, लेकिन जो आपका बाय प्रोडक्ट है उसमें फिर वो उसका परसेंटेज काफी बढ़ जाता है। तो ये काफी बड़ा एक चैलेंज है। आई थिंक इंडस्ट्री इसके ऊपर साथ में मिलकर काम किया जा सकता है। इट्स अ गुड सजेशन कि हमारे डीडीजीएस को लो प्रीमियम इसलिए मिल रहा है या प्रीमियम नहीं मिल रहा है, और या हम compete नहीं कर पा रहे हैं बिकॉज ऑफ अवर क्वालिटी ऑल्सो। तो हमको इसका थोड़ा सा वी शुड टेक केयर ऑफ इट। Thanks a lot, Bimal ji. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and always thanks a lot for supporting us, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Right. So with this, we come to the conclusion of our first roundtable, and as you know, that actually it has been a very interesting discussion with different stakeholders, and we talked about from supply and demand to the policy on ethanol, on DDGS, regional dynamics of Middle East and Africa, Black Sea. Also, we had a good discussion about overall how the technicals look, and I believe you would have enjoyed the session, and we would also like take this opportunity to make you aware that we'll be having 5 more sessions which are scheduled from tomorrow onwards, and we'll be having a discussion of wheat tomorrow, then followed by rice, then followed by soybean, then pulses, and last but not the least, sugar at the end. So I would like to share with you that tomorrow we are having an extremely insightful panel of speaker related to wheat. And if you can see that, we'll be having Mr. Hisham, who is from Middle East. We have got Anna. She takes care of operations across Black Sea to Southeast Asia and Middle East. Then we have Mr. Mitesh Gupta, who also wears a hat of a functionary of the Rural Association of India. We have one of the very eminent speaker, Mark, who keep a very close eye on the global geopolitics related to grain. We have got Cesar Soares, again a very sharp commodity strategic advisor. Rajiv Yadav, who also is an old hat when it comes to wheat and other grains. And you are truly Deepak Pareek, that's me, would be moderating this session. And I would request you to join again tomorrow. And with that, we would like to take this opportunity to thank all of you and looking forward to see you tomorrow. Have a great evening. Goodbye.
Thank you.